What if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? The courtroom was ice cold, not in temperature, but in tension. A murmur rippled through the public gallery as Elon Musk stepped into the witness stand. Cameras weren't allowed, but it didn't stop the world outside from hanging on every update, every tweet, every whispered headline. This was not just any trial, this was a battle between a billionaire tech mogul and a federal judge with a personal stake buried deep beneath layers of legal formality. Judge Grace Monroe adjusted her glasses slowly, deliberately, as if the seconds ticking by would soften the gravity of what was about to happen. Elon didn't flinch. He met her stare with a peculiar stillness, as though he knew something no one else in the room did. The air was taut with anticipation. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice steady but not unfeeling, "can you tell this court what responsibility means to a man with more power than nations?" A silence stretched long enough to be uncomfortable. Then Elon leaned forward. "Responsibility," he said, "has nothing to do with power and everything to do with consequence." That line echoed in the chamber like a dropped glass in a library. No one moved. This wasn't how he was supposed to respond. Not defensively. Not evasively. Not with prepared statements vetted by his legal team. The reporters scribbled like mad, eyes wide. The opposing attorney looked blindsided. Even Grace blinked once, as if recalibrating her approach. And that was just the beginning. 2 years earlier, no one could have predicted this moment. Back then, Grace Monroe had been just another federal judge with a reputation for fairness, discipline, and an unshakable sense of right and wrong. She was smart but not flashy, respected but not revered, and most importantly, she never chased headlines. Then came the lawsuit. A sweeping class action against Neuralink Tech, a Musk-affiliated company that had marketed a breakthrough neural chip. Grace wasn't assigned the case by chance. She requested it, quietly, pulling strings behind chambers' doors. She never told anyone why. Not the court clerks. Not the media. Not even her closest friend, Camila. But the truth? The truth was hidden in an old voicemail, a scratchy file she'd replayed hundreds of times. "Gracie," her brother had said, voice trembling, "I trusted them. I thought this would fix everything. My seizures, my memory. I didn't know it would." The message cut off there. The next day, he was found unresponsive, the chip malfunctioning in ways no one had anticipated. Elon's lawyers called it a tragedy. Regulators shrugged. Investors moved on. But Grace never did. Now here they were, facing each other in a courtroom painted with the memories of personal loss and public scrutiny. Elon seemed different than she imagined, less arrogant, more weary. His hair was slightly disheveled, his tie slightly askew. Still, his presence was undeniable. He didn't dominate the room with bluster but with gravity, like a planet pulling all things toward him. Grace continued. "You launched a product you claimed was safe, efficient, and backed by peer-reviewed research. Yet here we are. Lives lost. Lives changed. Was it ambition that clouded your judgment?" Elon exhaled through his nose. "No. It was hope. Hope can be more dangerous than ambition. Hope is what made us rush. Hope is what made us blind." Her gavel didn't move. Her face didn't twitch. But inside, something stirred. This wasn't the tech billionaire she expected to confront. This was a man who seemed, at least for a moment, haunted. Outside the courthouse, a storm was brewing, both literally and metaphorically. Protesters lined the barricades. Some waved signs denouncing corporate greed, others pleaded with Elon to continue innovation at any cost. News vans were double-parked along every curb, the story growing larger by the minute. Inside, Grace kept her gaze locked on the man in front of her. "Hope without responsibility becomes negligence," she said quietly. Elon nodded once. "That's fair." She wasn't ready for that either. She wasn't ready for his humanity. But she wouldn't let it sway her. Not yet. She turned to the room. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It was her way of pulling in the digital jury, the millions who weren't physically in court but were watching, reacting, judging. And then, she called recess. The courtroom erupted into hushed murmurs, the bailiff's voice rising above it to restore order. Elon remained seated, eyes down, fingers steepled together. Grace stood and stepped into her chambers, her heart pounding. She stared at a framed photo on her desk, her and her brother, arms around each other, young and hopeful. She sat down heavily, the weight of justice pressing against her spine. She had just begun what could become the trial of the century. But more than that, she had just confronted the man she quietly blamed for her brother's death, and his answer hadn't been what she expected. Not arrogant. Not dismissive. But real. Uncomfortably real. Grace wasn't sure if that made the road ahead easier or infinitely more complicated. All she knew was that this story, her story, had only just begun. Grace Monroe had always known life wouldn't hand her anything for free. Growing up in the worn-down neighborhoods of East Detroit, she learned early that survival depended on resilience, not miracles. Her mother, Deborah, worked 2 jobs, nursing aide by day, gas station cashier by night, and still managed to put a hot plate on the table and a bedtime story in Grace's ear. Her father left before she could remember his face, and her mother never spoke his name. But it was okay. Grace had her older brother, Tyler. Tyler made her laugh when the lights got cut off, shared his pancakes when the fridge went empty, and walked her to school even when his asthma flared. He was more than a sibling. He was her lighthouse. And when he got a full scholarship to MIT, it was like the whole family got one. For a while, things looked up. Grace graduated high school as valedictorian, got accepted into Yale on a need-based grant, and followed Tyler into the world of brainpower and ambition. But where Tyler had always dreamed of changing the world through technology, Grace had a different calling, justice. After watching their neighborhood crumble under redlining, exploitation, and systemic neglect, she knew laws didn't just matter, they determined who got to live with dignity and who got left behind. She would become a lawyer. She would fix the system from the inside out. Law school was brutal, and the ivory tower didn't welcome people like her with open arms. But Grace fought her way through every seminar and clerkship with fire in her veins and her mother's tired voice echoing in her mind, "Don't let the world tell you who you are. You tell it." It was during her second year at Yale that tragedy came calling. Tyler, then working as a lead engineer at a startup recently acquired by a Musk-affiliated biotech firm, Neuralink Tech, had volunteered to be part of an internal trial, a new neural enhancement chip that promised memory optimization, neurological healing, and cognitive clarity. He told Grace over coffee one winter break that this was the future. "They said this could fix my epilepsy," he whispered, excitement dancing in his voice. "This isn't just tech, Gracie. This is salvation." She had reservations. Neural implants. Human trials. It sounded premature, unsafe. But Tyler believed. He always believed. When he began experiencing migraines and short-term memory glitches weeks later, he brushed it off. "It's just adjustment," he'd said. "They're refining the firmware." But then the seizures returned, worse than before. One day, she called and he didn't answer. Not that day. Not the next. When she flew to Boston and found his apartment still, silent, and cold, it was the voicemail that haunted her most. "Gracie. I trusted them. I thought this would fix everything. I didn't know it would." Static. And then nothing. The coroner's report said brain hemorrhage linked to electrical surges. The company report called it an unfortunate outlier event. The media moved on to Musk's next project, the world never slowing down long enough to ask, who was this young man, and why did he die? Grace asked. Every day. Every night. After law school, she poured herself into public defense work, fighting for low-income families, survivors of corporate fraud, victims of broken promises. Her rise was meteoric. Not because of ambition, but because of relentless purpose. She refused to be another lawyer climbing the ladder of prestige. She was there for war. Within 8 years, she was appointed as a federal judge, one of the youngest in history and the first black woman in her district to hold that title. The headlines celebrated her, but inside, she was still that sister listening to a broken voicemail over and over again. She kept Tyler's last message on an encrypted drive, hidden even from herself sometimes. On the outside, she wore control like armor. Inside, she burned. Camila Torres, her closest friend from undergrad and now a renowned investigative journalist, remained one of her few emotional outlets. Over wine and candlelight in Camila's D.C. apartment, Grace would sometimes let her composure slip. "Do you think they knew?" Grace asked once, eyes glassy. "Do you think Musk knew what they were doing to people like Tyler?" Camila shrugged. "Maybe not directly. But billionaires don't ask too many questions when the profit graphs are moving up." Grace nodded. She knew that truth better than most. Musk had become a symbol of innovation, disruption, ego, brilliance. To some, he was a hero. To others, a reckless gambler playing with the lives of the vulnerable. To Grace, he was the face on the other side of her grief. Not because he had personally hurt Tyler, but because the empire he'd built had cost her everything. The day she requested to preside over the class action lawsuit against Neuralink Tech, no one batted an eye. She had a reputation for fairness. No one questioned her motive. Only Camila knew. "Are you sure this is smart?" Camila asked. "You're too close to it." "That's exactly why I have to do it," Grace replied. "They buried my brother under bureaucracy and indifference. I want them to look me in the eye when they justify it." The weeks leading up to the trial were a blur of motions, filings, depositions. She reviewed every technical paper, every whistleblower statement, every redacted report. She learned about lithium-ion misfires, irregular neural pulses, firmware bugs masked in quarterly updates. She read internal emails hinting at rushed launches and underfunded safety protocols. It was everything she feared. And it was bigger than Tyler. Dozens of others, men and women with names not famous enough to trend, had suffered. Memory collapse. Seizures. In some cases, complete loss of motor control. All experimental. All preventable. Musk's name wasn't directly tied in the operational chain, but his signatures approved budgets, set timelines, pushed announcements. He might not have built the devices, but he built the machine that demanded speed over safety. Grace didn't want revenge. She wanted reckoning. And now, sitting in that courtroom staring across at Elon Musk himself, she could feel the fire she'd carried all these years rising to her throat. He didn't look like a villain. He looked tired. She hated that. She hated that he seemed human. Because that made it harder. If he had walked in smug, flippant, dismissive, she could have destroyed him with clean conscience. But his eyes, they weren't defiant. They were searching. She wondered what he was looking for. Grace had read every word of his deposition. He claimed no knowledge of internal malfunctions. He claimed deep regret. But she knew better. Power doesn't apologize unless it's cornered. She intended to do just that. And yet, as his words echoed, responsibility has nothing to do with power and everything to do with consequence, she found herself caught off guard. What if he truly meant it? What if he wasn't here to fight, but to admit? That thought unnerved her more than any defense strategy. Because if he acknowledged fault, what would justice look like then? The courtroom door creaked open. A clerk leaned in to inform her the recess would end in 3 minutes. Grace nodded, straightened her posture, and looked again at the photo she kept inside her folder. Tyler, 25 years old, smiling in a lab coat, eyes lit with dreams. This was why she was here. Not for headlines. Not for politics. For Tyler. For everyone like him. And maybe, just maybe, for the man sitting across the courtroom who had finally been forced to confront what it meant to carry the weight of consequence. The next chapter of this story would not be clean. It would not be comfortable. But it would be necessary. Justice, Grace had learned, isn't about neat endings. It's about showing up. Again. And again. Until truth has no choice but to speak. The storm outside had started as a drizzle but was now soaking the courthouse steps in relentless sheets of gray, like the weather itself knew tension was thickening. Inside, Judge Grace Monroe resumed her seat on the bench, her black robe crisp, posture firm. The courtroom murmurs faded into silence. Elon Musk remained at the witness table, expression unreadable, his lawyers shifting uneasily beside him. What had begun as a class-action product liability lawsuit was quickly becoming something deeper, a philosophical and moral cross-examination of modern tech, ambition, and the cost of innovation. Grace had spent her entire legal career navigating conflict, but this case, this man, made the air heavier with every session. She glanced over at the plaintiff's attorney, Sarah Kilpatrick, a hard-edged woman with a mind like a steel trap. Sarah stood. "Your Honor," she began, "we'd like to enter into evidence an internal Neuralink tech memo dated March 22, which shows that beta test anomalies were reported and documented weeks before public rollout." She walked the document to the bench. Grace took it, scanning its contents quickly. Terms like spike frequency error, neurological decay, and override failure rate jumped out at her. Musk didn't blink. But Grace noticed his hand twitch. Just slightly, as his attorney leaned over to whisper. That's when the friction truly began. For days, each new document, each new witness peeled back another layer of corporate negligence dressed in the language of innovation. Grace listened intently as former Neuralink engineers took the stand and described how concerns were dismissed, data was massaged to fit investor expectations, and clinical trial setbacks were relabeled as outliers. The defense argued that all emerging technologies carried risk, and Neuralink's intentions were good. The product was never sold as a cure, one attorney said. It was marketed as a breakthrough. And breakthroughs, by nature, are imperfect. But that argument rang hollow for Grace. Tyler had believed them. Tyler had trusted the language. And now, he was gone. Musk, when called to answer, remained careful. His words were deliberate, sometimes even poetic. He did not deflect responsibility entirely, but neither did he accept it outright. Instead, he danced around nuance, stating that while he pushed for progress, he relied on his executive teams to ensure safety standards. "I don't write the code," he said. "I don't perform the surgeries. But I fund the future. If that makes me accountable, then I accept that." The room shifted uncomfortably at that. It wasn't a full admission, but it wasn't evasion either. Grace watched jurors take notes, her mind working 3 steps ahead. Musk was playing a long game, walking a narrow tightrope between sincerity and self-preservation. Yet the more Grace saw him, the harder it became to dehumanize him. He didn't act like a man out to win. He acted like someone trying to say something without knowing how. The conflict wasn't just in court anymore. It was in Grace. It was in every whisper of her conscience that asked whether justice meant punishing a man who might be trying to change. One afternoon, during a particularly damning cross-examination of the former Neuralink product lead, a startling development occurred. Sarah Kilpatrick presented an email string dated just before launch, emails between the product team and the CEO's office. One of the emails had Musk's initials in the approval block. Musk stiffened. Grace leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "Mr. Musk," Sarah said, "can you confirm that this is your final approval before the product's early release?" Elon didn't look at the email. He looked at Grace. Yes, he said. That's mine. A murmur swept the room. That one word cracked something wide open. Suddenly, Musk's involvement wasn't peripheral. It was direct. It was tangible. The defense tried to pivot. Context matters, one lawyer snapped. The client was acting based on advisement from multiple departments. But the jury had already heard what it needed. The weight of direct responsibility now sat firmly in the chair where Elon Musk was seated. That evening, Camilla called Grace. "I'm telling you," she said, "the dam just broke. Every outlet's running with it." Musk signed off. He can't pretend to be just a dreamer anymore. Grace stared at her living room wall, painted the same dull ivory for years. "And yet he hasn't denied it," she said quietly. "He didn't squirm. He just said yes." "So what?" Camilla said. "That doesn't earn him a redemption arc." "I know," Grace murmured, but something inside her wasn't so sure. The following day, Musk requested to address the court directly. Sarah objected. The defense was cautious. But Grace allowed it. She needed to hear what he had to say without scripts, without lawyers, without any more masks. Elon stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the front of the courtroom. "I didn't come here to win," he said. "I came here because I believe in learning from mistakes. But I also want to be clear, I didn't kill anyone. I didn't hurt anyone intentionally. If what I funded became harmful, then yes, I'm responsible in part. But the purpose was never profit at the cost of people. It was progress." He turned to face the jury. "Every step forward comes with risk. We all use smartphones, planes, medications. There's a trade-off. Neuralink was a dream to end suffering. We didn't get it right. I wish we had." Grace felt a sharp pain behind her eyes. Not because he was wrong. But because he was too close to right. This was the rising conflict she hadn't anticipated. Not just a war against corporate negligence, but a war inside herself. What if justice wasn't a binary? What if it was messy and full of contradiction? And what did that mean for Tyler? Was his death a misstep? A casualty? A human life swallowed in the gears of forward motion? Outside the courthouse, protesters clashed, those who called Musk a murderer and those who called him a misunderstood genius. Inside, the tension doubled with each session. An anonymous leak claimed a juror had been contacted by someone tied to Neuralink. Grace launched an internal investigation. Meanwhile, another whistleblower emailed Camilla, claiming there were deeper flaws covered up, this time not just in development, but in human testing authorization. Grace authorized subpoenas. The pressure was mounting. Yet through it all, Elon Musk showed up. No delays. No excuses. He sat through every word, never once asking for special treatment. That, more than anything, unsettled Grace. The story she had prepared to prosecute was becoming tangled with a story she wasn't sure she understood. Was Musk being honest? Was he performing sincerity? Were the lines even separate anymore? At night, she reviewed testimony alone in her kitchen, Tyler's journal open on the table. On one page, he had scribbled, "Imagine being the first to try something that changes the world." Scary, right? But also, lucky. That word echoed. Lucky. Was Tyler lucky to be one of the first? Or was he unlucky to be part of something too new, too flawed? Grace didn't know. All she knew was that justice had to mean more than blame. It had to mean accountability, yes, but also truth. Not neat truth. Whole truth. The kind that broke things open, even hearts. The kind that left scars and wisdom side by side. One morning before court, Grace caught a rare moment alone with Musk in the corridor. He looked tired, his eyes rimmed in red. "Why didn't you delay the trial?" she asked quietly. You had every legal tool to postpone. Elon glanced at her. Because if I delayed, it would look like I was hiding. And I've spent my whole life trying not to be afraid of the fire. Grace nodded slowly. No more words. She turned, robe flowing behind her, and walked into court. This conflict wasn't over. But it was no longer just about Musk versus a grieving sister. It was about what the future costs when no one asks who's paying the price. And Grace would make sure everyone asked. Starting now. The courtroom felt smaller the day everything changed, not physically, but in atmosphere, as though the walls themselves were pressing inward, witnessing something historic and unsure whether to flinch or applaud. Judge Grace Monroe sat in her chambers earlier that morning staring at a subpoena in her hand, sealed and direct, with access granted to one of Neuralink Tech's previously restricted internal databases, thanks to new whistleblower evidence submitted anonymously through her office's secure server. The evidence had been reviewed overnight by the Justice Department, and the judge had personally approved a motion to unseal specific records that had never seen the light of day. Her breath caught slightly as she looked at the metadata, clinical trial files labeled Phase Beta Shadow and Bexodax, not part of any officially declared human testing protocols. These weren't even filed under the US FDA documentation Neuralink Tech had submitted during the lawsuit's discovery period. Something was hidden, something deeply buried. She requested immediate analysis from a government-appointed bioethics advisor, and within hours, a short report landed on her desk confirming that at least 3 of the trial participants listed in those documents were deceased. Not from random, unrelated causes, but all tied to neurovascular complications within 6 months of device implantation. None of these deaths had been reported through proper regulatory channels. Grace's hands shook slightly, but she refused to let emotion derail her. This was no longer just about corporate negligence or ambitious technology, it was about suppressed truth and unauthorized experimentation, and it reeked of something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The courtroom was packed that day, media banned but every seat filled with jurors, clerks, legal teams, and key witnesses. Elon Musk, seated with his lead counsel, looked paler than usual, jaw tight but his posture unflinching, eyes scanning the room like he was preparing for war or confession, no in-between. Grace entered the courtroom, and the moment she called the court to order, a sense of impending revelation clung to the proceedings like static in the air. This court, she began, has received newly declassified material directly tied to the operations and trial processes of Neuralink Tech. These documents contain information not previously disclosed during the discovery phase and may have significant bearing on the outcome of these proceedings. She turned to Sarah Kilpatrick, the plaintiff's attorney, who was already prepared. "We would like to call Dr. Amelia Harrow to the stand," Sarah said firmly. Dr. Harrow, a neuroethics consultant and former Neuralink external advisor, took the stand with a composure that was chilling in its clarity. "What we're looking at," she said, gesturing to the sealed exhibit being displayed for jurors only, "is proof that Neuralink Tech initiated a second-phase human trial on unsanctioned subjects. These participants were not included in the published dataset. Their trials were neither reviewed nor audited by any institutional review board. These trials were conducted in a foreign jurisdiction, then concealed from U.S. regulatory filings." The courtroom gasped. Elon didn't react at first, but Grace saw his eyes narrow with precision, not in denial, but in calculation, as if he were trying to piece together whether he had known and forgotten, or never known and now regretted. Sarah stepped forward. "Dr. Harrow, are you asserting that this trial included live human testing with no formal consent or oversight?" Dr. Harrow nodded. "Yes. Some were offered off-the-record incentives. Others may not have known the extent of what was implanted. One was Tyler Monroe." The words didn't echo, they detonated. Grace's spine went cold. Her breath stopped. She blinked slowly, keeping her face still, but inside, everything fractured. She had known her brother participated in a trial. But this was something else. Sarah looked stunned, and Elon's defense team immediately requested a recess, citing emotional bias due to the judge's personal connection. Grace paused. Motion denied. This court will proceed. If anyone believes this affects my ability to render impartial judgment, they may file a complaint. But this trial continues. Her voice was calm, but her insides screamed. Elon's face had shifted. Gone was the neutral observer. In its place was something more raw, more human. He was staring at her now, not with defensiveness, not even guilt, but confusion and sadness. He whispered something to his lawyer, who quickly shuffled through papers and looked visibly alarmed. Then Musk stood up. "Your Honor," he said, breaking courtroom procedure, "I request permission to approach." Murmurs exploded, but Grace held up her hand. "Granted." Elon walked slowly to the stand, then turned to the jury, to the attorneys, and finally to Grace. "I didn't know," he said. "Not this. I knew of the beta phases, I knew we were pushing limits, but these files, these names, they were never shared with me. Someone did this without clearance, without ethics. And if it's true that Tyler Monroe was part of this program, then I failed more profoundly than I ever understood. It wasn't a performance. Grace knew performance. This wasn't that. This was a man discovering the full scale of a shadow buried within his own empire. I created a system," Elon continued, "so wide and complex that I could no longer see all its parts. That's not just a mistake. It's a design flaw. In me." The room was silent. The jury stunned. Grace's heart was pounding, not from vindication, but from grief, thick and bitter. She didn't want his tears. She didn't want a speech. She wanted the truth, the whole truth, and even though he was giving it, it wasn't enough to bring Tyler back. But it was something. Elon returned to his seat. Sarah requested the immediate admission of all sealed files into evidence. Grace agreed, ruling that the full database be reviewed under federal investigation. From that moment forward, the trial transformed. It was no longer a civil case. It was a reckoning. Every testimony after that came laced with urgency. Engineers revealed safety requests buried under "Go Live" directives. Auditors disclosed financial pressures to meet quarterly promises to stakeholders. Developers described tampered data logs, firmware patches that covered up patient complaints, and internal memos that warned, if Musk sees this before launch, the whole timeline crashes. The language was ruthless. Business dressed up in pseudo-heroism. As the days went on, Grace didn't break, though inside, she barely slept. She stared at the documents, the emails, the diagrams, and always found her brother's name hidden in some corner, some line, some reference code, like a ghost haunting the very framework of the company that promised to save him. Camila called nightly, worried. "You need to breathe," she said once. "You need to step back or you'll go down with this." But Grace couldn't. This wasn't about Musk anymore. It wasn't even about Neuralink tech. It was about the belief that technology without accountability becomes something monstrous, and that the people who get trampled beneath it are always the ones whose names no one remembers. Well, Tyler's name would be remembered. And so would every other test subject who had become an invisible data point. As the final week of testimony approached, Grace prepared for what she knew would be the final battle, not between lawyers, not between right and wrong, but between what the public wanted this trial to mean and what it actually revealed. This was not a case of good versus evil. This was a story about ambition, blindness, human fallibility, and the consequences of building faster than we can understand. Grace stood in her office late one evening, lights low, fingers resting on Tyler's journal. On the inside cover, he had scrawled a quote. "We chase stars thinking they'll save us, but sometimes the light blinds before it heals." She read it again and again, tears streaming silently. This was the climactic journey, her journey, and she wasn't sure how it would end. But she knew one thing, it wouldn't end quietly. It would end with truth, no matter how hard it hurt. And that would have to be enough. The final week of the trial brought a strange quietness to the courtroom, the kind that settles in when everyone knows the world is about to change but no one knows how. The media was camped outside day and night, broadcasting around-the-clock analysis, while online forums boiled over with debate, rage, and impossible questions. Was Elon Musk a genius who lost control of his empire? A visionary too detached to see the cracks in the machine he built? Or was he simply the face of a system that rewarded innovation regardless of the collateral damage? Inside the courtroom, the tension was absolute. On the bench, Judge Grace Monroe sat composed but hollow-eyed, each sleepless night carved into her expression. Her gavel felt heavier than ever, as though she wasn't holding wood and steel but the weight of every person failed by the illusion of progress. That morning, she had stared at her own reflection for too long, trying to find the sister of the boy who once told her he wanted to help people, only to become a statistic buried under silence. The plaintiff's side had requested permission to play one final recorded deposition, unreleased until now, a video statement from one of the last trial subjects before his death, a man named Raymond Ellis, who had participated in the same classified program as Tyler. The court dimmed the lights. The video began. Raymond sat in a hospital bed, a thin man with wild eyes and trembling fingers. He spoke slowly, clearly in pain, but determined. "They told me I was going to help make history," he said. "They said the chip would make me better. Fix the tremors. Fix the memory lapses. But what they didn't say was that it would make me someone else." His voice cracked. "I forgot who I was, Judge. I forgot my daughter's name. I couldn't feel music. I couldn't pray. I wasn't me anymore. I was just data. And when I asked for help, they said it was normal. Part of the learning curve." His eyes narrowed into the lens. "I don't blame Elon Musk for dreaming big. I blame him for not looking down to see who got stepped on." The screen faded to black. A heavy silence choked the courtroom. No one moved. Grace didn't speak. Elon didn't blink. Even Sarah Kilpatrick's voice faltered when she rose to rest her case. "The defense may present final argument," Grace said, her voice so calm it almost didn't sound like her own. Elon Musk stood without cue. No legal counsel. No objections. He looked at Grace, then at the jury, and then back to Grace. "I would like to speak on my own behalf," he said. She nodded. He stepped forward. "I never set out to harm anyone. When we started Neuralink Tech, the idea was to create something beautiful, something that could take people out of wheelchairs, restore memory, treat depression in ways medication couldn't. I believed in that dream with everything I had. But somewhere along the way, I let the system run ahead of the ethics. I let momentum become justification. I let people under me make decisions I should have stopped, but didn't, because I wanted it to work. I wanted to win. And I thought that if we succeeded, the ends would justify the means. But that's not how progress works. That's how people get hurt." He swallowed hard, the words catching. "When I saw the files, and I saw the name Tyler Monroe, it broke something in me. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't. But it doesn't matter if I knew. It happened under my name. Under my money. Under my silence." He turned toward Grace. "Judge Monroe, I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, but because I didn't stop it before someone you loved paid the price for my ignorance." Grace felt the tear slide down her cheek before she realized it was there. She didn't wipe it away. She let it stay, a silent acknowledgement that the wall between her grief and her duty had finally cracked. Elon continued, "Whatever verdict this court reaches, I accept it. If that means financial ruin, if that means criminal charges, if that means I never lead another company again, I accept it. But I promise you this, the world will remember Tyler Monroe. And not just as a victim. But as the man who forced me to wake up." He stepped back. The courtroom was completely still. Grace stared at him, and for the first time, she didn't see a billionaire or a tech mogul or a media icon. She saw a man standing in the ashes of something he thought was unbreakable. And in that moment, something changed inside her, not forgiveness, not absolution, but understanding. The emotional climax wasn't vengeance. It wasn't gavel pounding or dramatic sentencing. It was the crushing realization that sometimes justice means facing the mirror, and making the broken pieces mean something again. Grace recessed the court. In chambers, she sat alone, listening to Tyler's old voicemail for the last time. Gracie. I trusted them. I thought this would fix everything. She didn't cry this time. She didn't rage. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "You mattered. You changed the world. Even if no one else knew it." She walked back into the courtroom, took her seat, and delivered her ruling. This court finds that Neuralink Tech engaged in negligent conduct that resulted in loss of life, failure to obtain informed consent, and willful suppression of test trial outcomes. Elon Musk, as principal financial and executive authority, bears partial legal responsibility. Monetary restitution will be awarded to all surviving victims and families. A federal criminal investigation into unauthorized human experimentation is hereby authorized. She paused. Then, softer, "This isn't a victory. It's a reckoning. And a beginning." Elon nodded once, not defiant, not devastated, just quiet. The court adjourned. And just like that, it was over. Or maybe, it had just begun. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sun broke through the clouds in shy streaks. Protesters stood silently now. Cameras rolled without frenzy. And Grace, walking down the steps alone, breathed in the air like she was remembering how. She had not won. She had not healed. But she had spoken the truth. And the world, for one rare moment, had listened. 2 months after the final gavel fell, the courthouse was quiet again, but the echo of the trial still rippled across the country like a seismic wave no one could unfeel. News outlets continued to dissect every ruling, every word from the bench, every facial expression Elon Musk gave when he said, "I accept this." Editorials were split. Some hailed the verdict as a long-overdue confrontation between unregulated tech and human cost, while others questioned the utility of punishment when the gears of progress were already too far spun to reverse. But for Grace Monroe, none of that mattered in the way it used to. Her life had fundamentally shifted. Not just because she presided over one of the most high-profile corporate reckonings of the decade, but because for the first time in her entire legal career, she had been forced to feel the full gravity of what justice actually meant when it became personal. The line between the gavel and the grave had blurred, and yet somehow, in the aftermath, something resembling peace had begun to settle over her like dust on an old book finally closed. Tyler's name, now etched into national record, had been spoken in Congress, printed in headlines, discussed in ethics classes, and even used by whistleblower advocacy groups as a symbol of the cost of unchecked innovation. Grace had received letters, hundreds of them. From families who had loved ones affected by experimental tech, from students who had watched the trial with their professors and cried during Raymond Ellis's deposition, from engineers who admitted they had left Neuralink Tech or other similar startups because of the moral ambiguity they couldn't reconcile with anymore. Some letters offered praise. Others offered apology. A few offered anger, still convinced she should have come down harder, demanded more punishment, locked Musk away. But Grace had not sentenced from vengeance. She had sentenced from truth. And truth, as it turned out, was a jagged thing. On a quiet Sunday morning, Grace stood alone in the park where she and Tyler used to meet for coffee before he'd head to the lab. She carried a thermos now instead of buying from the cart. It felt like ritual. Like memory. Like an offering. She sat on their old bench and opened his journal, now worn, pages dog-eared from repeated reading. She flipped to the last page he ever wrote, a half-finished sentence that ended mid-word. She had memorized it. If this works, maybe people will see, that was it. No conclusion. No context. But she knew what he meant. Tyler had believed in the possibility that technology could give people dignity, not just function. He hadn't been chasing fame or money. He had simply wanted to matter. And now, he did. She looked up at the sky, a pale blue canvas streaked with morning gold, and whispered, "They see you now, little brother." Across town, in a private office with frosted glass, Elon Musk sat quietly with a federal mediator. The criminal investigation into the unauthorized trials was ongoing, and he had voluntarily offered access to all internal systems, every server, every email archive. It was his idea, not his lawyers'. He wanted transparency. Not for the cameras. Not for his reputation. But because something in him had shifted the day he saw Tyler's name in that database and realized that innovation without empathy was just elegant harm. He had stepped down from the Neuralink board, replaced his executive team, and committed hundreds of millions into establishing an independent global ethics review fund for neurotechnology research. He named it the Monroe Initiative, without asking Grace for permission. He didn't need to. It wasn't for her. It was for Tyler. And for every person who never got to finish the sentence that might have changed the world. In an unexpected turn, he began visiting universities, not to speak about profit margins or artificial intelligence, but to talk about failure. In one talk at Stanford, he stood in front of a crowd of engineers and said, "Everyone loves the word disruption. They forget that real disruption means someone, somewhere, gets torn apart. What matters is how you build back what you break." The crowd was quiet. But they listened. Across social media, his tone had changed. No more cryptic memes. No provocations. Just silence, mostly. Occasional links to medical journals. A rare quote from a philosopher. A retweet of a family who used their settlement funds to start a nonprofit. The world hadn't forgiven him overnight, nor should it. But they had, in some measure, seen him change. And change was something even his harshest critics couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Grace returned to the bench, but with new parameters. She started writing. Not rulings, but essays. Reflections. Speeches for panels on judicial ethics, AI legislation, and emotional boundaries in public service. She had been invited to speak at Yale. Then Harvard. Then The Hague. But she said no to most of them. She didn't want to be a celebrity judge. She wanted to be human again. She and Camila grew closer, and though their grief took different shapes, they found comfort in sharing it openly. One night, over dinner, Camila said, "You didn't just try a case. You forced a mirror onto a giant." And he actually looked into it. Grace nodded. "I didn't want a villain," she said. "I wanted him to understand the cost." And he did, Camila whispered. Eventually. On the anniversary of Tyler's first implant date, a small ceremony was held at the base of a new memorial wall unveiled in Washington, D.C. Etched into its glass were the names of every known subject who had suffered fatal consequences during unauthorized or undisclosed tech trials across all major companies, not just Neuralink. At the center of the wall was Tyler Monroe's name, not at the top, not bolded, but level with everyone else's, exactly how he would have wanted it. Grace gave a short speech. She didn't cry. She didn't moralize. She simply said, progress must never come at the expense of remembrance. The crowd applauded, but more importantly, they listened. As the sun set that day, Grace stood alone beside the wall, her fingers brushing her brother's name, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled, not a full smile, not joy, but something close to peace. In her chambers that week, a new inscription was carved into the wood near her desk, small and discreet: "Justice is not the end of pain. It's the beginning of meaning." She didn't know where the next chapter of her life would take her. Maybe she'd teach. Maybe she'd write a book. Maybe she'd finally adopt that dog Tyler used to beg her to get. But whatever came next, she knew this: she had done the hardest thing a judge could ever do, not just render a verdict, but live through one. And she had not come out whole. But she had come out true. And in the world she now saw more clearly, that was enough. In the months following the trial, the verdict against Neuralink Tech sent tremors through Silicon Valley, Capitol Hill, and every biotech firm that had once prided itself on being too fast to regulate. The ripple effect wasn't just legal, it was cultural, institutional, ideological. Lobbyists who had once fought fiercely against oversight began to change their tune as public pressure mounted, as investors pulled back, as consumer trust became fragile and expensive to maintain. Congressional hearings ignited with bipartisan urgency as lawmakers across party lines cited the Monroe v. Neuralink Tech case as a catalyst for emergency legislation aimed at neurotechnology governance. Grace Monroe's name, reluctantly but inevitably, became shorthand for judicial accountability in an age when innovation had often outpaced ethics. She was invited, repeatedly, to consult on bills, to speak before committees, to endorse new oversight bodies, but she declined nearly every request. Her position remained clear: she had done her part in the courtroom. The lawmakers had to do theirs in the real world. Still, the media wouldn't let go. Articles with headlines like, "The Woman Who Made Elon Musk Blink," and "Judge Monroe, the Brain Behind the Tech Reckoning," continued to cycle. But Grace refused interviews. She didn't need a platform. She needed change. Others took the spotlight: whistleblowers, victim families, policy experts, and she was glad for that. The more voices, the stronger the shift. Meanwhile, behind Neuralink's headquarters in Austin, an internal revolution brewed. The board, under public scrutiny and legal obligation, replaced several senior executives and installed a new CEO who vowed transparency and humility as the company's guiding principles. They renamed their most controversial research divisions and began an initiative to retroactively contact families of all trial participants, whether compensated or not, whether affected or not. It was a small gesture, but a powerful one. As for Elon Musk, he kept to his vow of public accountability. He stepped further back from Neuralink's day-to-day operations and continued to focus on the Monroe Initiative, which now operated independently as a third-party watchdog for emerging neurotechnology worldwide. He declined most interviews but granted one, 6 months after the verdict, to a former MIT professor who ran a podcast on ethical disruption. In it, Musk sounded measured, humble, and changed. "I was wrong," he said plainly. "I believed I could outpace human consequence. That if the goal was noble enough, the collateral would somehow justify itself. That's flawed thinking. That's hubris. And I paid for it. People paid for it. Now I just try to help clean up what I broke." The podcast trended for weeks, not because it was scandalous, but because it wasn't. It was a quiet reckoning. And people listened. At Yale Law School, a course was launched called the Monroe Doctrine. Case Law, Ethics, and the Limits of Technological Immunity. Students studied the transcripts, analyzed the judicial reasoning, debated whether Grace Monroe's dual role as judge and grieving sister created precedent or peril. But beyond the academic discourse, something more important was happening. A generation of future lawyers, engineers, and entrepreneurs was being shaped by the story. Not the scandal. The story. Grace was unaware of most of it. She had returned to a quieter rhythm. Mornings were slower. She jogged again, something she hadn't done since Tyler's death. She stopped reading news articles about herself. She declined a book deal, a movie offer, and even an invitation from Oprah. Her focus remained on the work she believed in, restoring faith in the system by doing her job, one quiet ruling at a time. Camila, now leading a nonprofit formed in Tyler's name, frequently met with patient advocacy groups and tech developers to promote consent-based testing and public education on neurological implants. Their work expanded internationally, forming alliances with similar groups in Europe and Asia. One afternoon, Grace joined Camila at a conference in D.C. not to speak, but just to listen. During a panel, a young girl, barely 16, stood up and asked, "Do you think technology will ever be safe?" Camila paused, then smiled. I think technology doesn't have to be perfect to be ethical. It just has to put people first. Grace watched from the crowd, pride swelling in her chest, not because they had fixed the world, but because they had started something honest. Something necessary. At a coffee shop months later, Grace ran into one of the jurors from the trial, a woman named Margaret. They exchanged pleasantries before Margaret leaned closer and said, "I've never sat in a courtroom before yours. I didn't know justice could feel human." Grace thanked her quietly, holding back tears. Because that's what it had been. Not flawless. Not clean. But human. That night, as she sat at home by the fireplace, Grace opened Tyler's journal again. For the first time, she wrote in the margins, not to annotate or remember, but to respond. Beneath his final unfinished line, "If this works, maybe people will see," she wrote, "They see now. And they won't forget." She closed the book. In the silence, her phone buzzed. It was an email from a neuroresearch lab in Sweden asking for guidance on forming their first independent ethics board. She smiled. Maybe she would reply in the morning. Or maybe she'd wait a few days. Because the work would always be there. But today, the ripple had reached far enough. For now, that was enough. In the heart of Silicon Valley, where glossy facades and glass towers once stood untouched by consequence, something strange had begun to take root in the wake of the Neuralink tech trial, reflection. The verdict had hit the tech industry like a rogue wave, not because Elon Musk was taken down, he wasn't entirely, but because someone had finally stopped the forward motion of innovation long enough to ask, at what cost? It wasn't the kind of question that drew venture capital or IPOs, but it was one that echoed through conference rooms and whiteboard sessions in ways no one could ignore anymore. At companies like MetaMind, SynthCore, and Cerebral Horizon, internal memos started to use words that had previously been dismissed as slowing progress, words like ethics, oversight, consent. Compliance teams doubled in size. Startups were now including neuroethics advisors in their founding teams, not because they had to yet, but because investors had started asking questions that used to be reserved for lawyers. Do you have safeguards against unintended neural feedback loops? How will you protect the identity of cognitive biometric data? What happens if a user changes their mind? The once glittering image of unshackled technological utopia was cracked, not shattered, but definitely fractured, and in that fracture was a new opportunity, for humility, for caution, for humanity. Grace Monroe had no idea how far the shockwave had traveled until she received a plain envelope in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note that read, "We were building something that could have hurt people. We stopped. You don't know us, but you saved lives." It was signed only with the names of 10 engineers, initials only, no affiliations. It wasn't a legal confession. It was something better, a moral one. She held the letter for a long time, turning it over in her hand like a relic, unsure whether to frame it or burn it or file it away. In the end, she tucked it into the last page of Tyler's journal, as if it belonged there, alongside his hopes. Meanwhile, the Monroe Initiative had grown faster than even Musk had anticipated. With zero profit motive and complete data transparency, the initiative quickly became the gold standard for tech ethics reviews. International companies began voluntarily submitting proposals for vetting, not out of legal requirement, but public expectation. A simple seal of approval from the Monroe Initiative carried more trust than the slickest PR campaign. But this wasn't about reputation anymore. It was about survival in a changed market. In private boardrooms across Palo Alto and Mountain View, executives who once bragged about disruption now spoke in quieter tones, aware that one misstep could land them in the next viral courtroom. Elon himself remained mostly behind the scenes, choosing to fund, empower, and step back. In one rare internal video call leaked to the public, he said, "If the Monroe Initiative does its job right, you'll never see my name on another trial docket again. That's not failure. That's course correction." The video was clipped, subtitled, and shared millions of times across platforms with captions like, "When Tech Grows Up." For Grace, all of this unfolded quietly. She followed some of it, but not closely. She had moved on to a new kind of role, not public, not powerful, but meaningful. She began teaching seminars at small colleges, far from the media circuits, under the name Grace Tyler, a nod to the brother who taught her how to ask questions before making declarations. Her students didn't always recognize her, and she preferred it that way. One day, during a lecture on jurisprudence and emotional neutrality, a student raised their hand and asked, "Is it possible for a judge to be too human?" Grace paused, then smiled. "No. But it's possible to be afraid of it." That answer sparked an hour of debate, but no one asked who she really was. And when class ended, she walked home in the rain, notebook pressed to her chest like it mattered more than the headlines ever did. Meanwhile, the tech landscape kept shifting. A neural entertainment company called Eunoia announced it would indefinitely delay its Dream Capture launch until further review by bioethicists. A startup specializing in cognitive enhancement pills published a manifesto titled "Transparency or Nothing," crediting the trial for the existential re-evaluation of their business. And in a small but telling moment, a prominent VC firm released a new clause in its funding agreements. All funded projects involving the human brain must undergo third-party ethical scrutiny, preferably through the Monroe Initiative or its academic counterparts. For the first time in Silicon Valley's recent history, the word "wait" became as valuable as "launch." Yet not everyone adapted peacefully. There were corners of the internet that called it overreach, a war on innovation, a return to fear-based thinking. Conspiracy theories bloomed like mold, some claiming Tyler Monroe never existed, others accusing Grace of being a plant, or a puppet, or part of some grand design to bring down Musk. Grace never responded. She didn't need to. The truth had already done its work. She spent more time outside now, taking walks with Camila, reading Tyler's favorite books, even joining a local storytelling circle under a pseudonym. When she told her own story, thinly veiled, names changed, the group listened with stunned silence. One older woman said afterward, "I hope whoever that judge was, she's okay now." Grace just nodded, smiled gently, and replied, "I think she's getting there." As for Elon, he was rarely seen in public, but occasionally someone would spot him in unlikely places, a quiet tech museum in Germany, a neuroscience lecture in Seoul, a public train in Amsterdam reading a worn paperback. Each time, the photos would surface online, and debates would reignite, but they were quieter now, more nuanced. He had become a man people couldn't quite categorize anymore. Not hero. Not villain. Just human. One night, Grace received a package at her door. Inside was a single object, a brain implant prototype, deactivated, polished, encased in glass. Beneath it was a note, "The first one we ever made. It never left the lab. I thought you should have it. For Tyler. E." She didn't display it. She didn't throw it away either. She simply placed it beside his journal, a reminder of what almost was, what almost cost everything. The world hadn't been saved. But it had been paused. It had been questioned. And in Silicon Valley, where speed had always been God, doubt had finally been given a seat at the table. After the public storm of the trial had subsided and the world turned its attention elsewhere, Grace Monroe found herself confronting a quieter, more personal battle that no courtroom could ever fully prepare her for, the internal reckoning with loss, responsibility, and forgiveness. The months following the verdict were marked not by headlines but by sleepless nights, by the slow unraveling of grief that had been buried beneath her fierce professionalism. She spent hours walking the city streets alone, the hum of traffic and the occasional shout from a street vendor grounding her in the mundane world while her mind circled relentlessly around the what-ifs. What if she had pushed harder for stricter oversight earlier in Tyler's career? What if she had stopped him from taking risks she now knew had fatal consequences? Those thoughts gnawed at her until the edges of her resolve blurred. In the solitude of her apartment, surrounded by mementos of her brother, old sketches of neural schematics, a cracked photo frame of the two of them laughing in college, a half-finished puzzle he had started, Grace began to confront a truth she had long avoided, that justice, no matter how fair or decisive, could never restore what had been lost. One evening, after a particularly long day on the bench, she found herself dialing a number she hadn't called in years. On the other end was Evelyn Monroe, their mother, whose voice carried the same mixture of warmth and sorrow Grace remembered from childhood. Their conversation was hesitant at first, as if the years of silence between them had formed a thick wall neither knew how to climb. But slowly, like a tide creeping in, the memories came back. Tyler's childhood mischief, their family dinners where laughter was both medicine and distraction, the fracturing that happened when grief became too heavy to carry together. Grace realized then that her fight with the law had overshadowed the fight with her family, and that healing would require more than rulings or public speeches. It would require vulnerability. Encouraged by that call, Grace began attending a local support group for families affected by technological accidents and medical negligence, a space where pain was shared without judgment and stories were told without interruption. It was humbling, sitting among strangers who carried wounds both visible and invisible, learning how their experiences intertwined with hers in ways she had never anticipated. One member, a father whose daughter's mind had been irrevocably altered by a faulty implant, spoke softly one night about forgiveness, not as forgetting, but as a choice to release the bitterness that poisoned the soul. Those words resonated deeply with Grace. Forgiveness, she realized, was not about absolving Elon Musk or Neuralink tech. It was about freeing herself from the chains of anger that threatened to consume her. Around the same time, Camila reached out with a proposal to co-author a book chronicling the trial, the human stories behind the headlines, and the ethical questions that technology would continue to raise. Grace was hesitant. Writing felt like exposing raw wounds to the world. But Camila reminded her gently that silence could be just as damaging as noise, and that the truth, no matter how painful, could light the way for others navigating similar shadows. Together, they began the painstaking process of weaving legal records with personal reflections, interviews with families, and expert insights. The manuscript became a mirror reflecting not just the past but the uncertain future of human-machine coexistence. Meanwhile, Elon Musk's transformation continued to unfold away from public scrutiny. Behind closed doors, he wrestled with his own demons, public criticism, legal battles, and the crushing weight of unintended consequences. Sources close to him revealed a man who had shifted from defiance to introspection, who had spent countless hours meeting with ethicists, families, and scientists not to justify but to understand. His support for the Monroe Initiative remained unwavering, and he funded new research on brain-computer interface safety protocols, emphasizing transparency and patient autonomy. Yet, he remained haunted by Tyler's death and the trial's fallout, a reminder that even the brightest minds can stumble when blinded by ambition. One quiet afternoon, Musk arranged a private meeting with Grace at a neutral location, a modest cafe far from the media frenzy. The encounter was unplanned, unscripted, raw. They spoke not as judge and defendant but as two people bound by tragedy and the desire to prevent further harm. Elon expressed remorse without excuses, acknowledging the pain caused and the lessons learned too late. Grace, in turn, shared the burden of losing her brother and the difficult balance between justice and mercy. The conversation ended without resolution, but with a mutual understanding that some wounds would never fully heal yet could still foster growth. As the seasons changed, Grace found solace in moments of quiet normalcy, tending to a small garden she had planted on her balcony, cooking meals with Camila, attending community theater performances. These fragments of everyday life became anchors amid the storm, reminding her that existence was more than trials and verdicts. She also began mentoring young women interested in law and technology ethics, passing on hard-earned wisdom about the importance of empathy in an increasingly complex world. Her story, once defined by tragedy and courtroom drama, slowly evolved into one of resilience and hope. In a powerful gesture of reconciliation, Grace accepted an invitation to speak at a technology ethics summit where Elon Musk was also present, marking the first public event where their paths crossed since the trial's conclusion. Their exchange on stage was brief but profound, two individuals who embodied opposing forces yet shared a commitment to safeguarding humanity's future. The audience responded with standing ovations, not for spectacle but for sincerity. Through all of this, Tyler's memory remained a guiding light, a reminder that behind every legal battle and technological breakthrough were real people whose lives could be altered forever. Grace often revisited his journal, finding new meanings in his words as her own understanding deepened. The unfinished sentence that had once haunted her transformed into a symbol of ongoing possibility, that even in the face of loss, the pursuit of knowledge and compassion must never cease. Ultimately, Grace Monroe's private reckoning taught her that justice was not a destination but a journey, one that required courage to face the darkest truths and humility to embrace the unknown. It was a journey she was still on, with scars that told stories of pain and perseverance, but also with a heart open to the fragile beauty of human connection and the hope that love, above all, would endure. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The courtroom battles and media storms that had defined Grace Monroe's public life were only one layer of the conflict sparked by Neuralink Tech's unchecked ambitions. Beneath the surface, an unseen battle raged, one fought not with legal briefs or news headlines, but in the corridors of innovation, in the labs where engineers and scientists wrestled with the ethical implications of their work long before the world took notice. In the weeks following the trial, whispers of caution and second thoughts spread quietly among developers, programmers, and bioengineers who had once believed their creations were simply the next step in human evolution. Many began to question whether the race to embed technology inside the brain was progressing too fast, too recklessly, ignoring the nuanced complexities of human identity, consent, and mental privacy. Inside a modest research facility on the outskirts of San Jose, a group of scientists led by Dr. Lena Whitman, a neuroethicist who had quietly advised the Monroe Initiative, convened to discuss what they called the future of cognitive autonomy. Their team was small but determined, made up of neurologists, psychologists, AI specialists, and former Neuralink Tech engineers disillusioned by the recklessness they had witnessed. They pored over data from previous trials, testimonies from affected families, and emerging neuroscientific studies that highlighted the unpredictable ways implanted devices could interfere with thought patterns, memory formation, and emotional regulation. It became clear to them that the technology's risks extended beyond physical harm, it threatened the very essence of personhood. Lena's group began drafting a manifesto, a comprehensive call to arms for the global scientific community, urging a moratorium on invasive neural implants until robust ethical frameworks and fail-safe mechanisms could be developed. They circulated the document quietly, inviting feedback and endorsements from universities, medical boards, and human rights organizations. To their surprise, the response was overwhelming. The manifesto ignited debates at conferences, sparked petitions, and became a rallying point for those concerned about the direction of neurotechnology. Meanwhile, the media, which had shifted focus to other sensational stories, couldn't ignore the growing grassroots movement that challenged the assumption that progress must be relentless and unchecked. Investigative reports uncovered alarming gaps in Neuralink Tech's earlier testing protocols, raising questions about regulatory capture and the pressures companies faced to prioritize market domination over safety. Social media exploded with hashtags like #NeuroEthicsNow and #PauseTheImplants, uniting voices from activists to academics, patients, and everyday citizens. Grace watched these developments from a distance, recognizing that the battle for responsible innovation was far from over and that real change would require more than a courtroom verdict. It required a cultural shift, a re-evaluation of what it meant to be human in an age when machines could intrude upon the mind itself. One afternoon, Lena reached out to Grace, requesting a meeting to discuss how the Monroe Initiative could support this new movement. Their conversation was electric with shared passion and mutual respect. Grace, whose judicial experience gave her insight into the practical challenges of enforcing ethical standards, found in Lena's scientific rigor a powerful complement. Together, they plotted a multifaceted strategy: advocacy, education, policy reform, and international cooperation. They envisioned a world where neurotechnology could enhance lives without sacrificing autonomy or dignity. But this vision faced formidable resistance. Some industry leaders dismissed the manifesto as alarmist, arguing that innovation thrived on risk and that society would adapt to new realities as it always had. Investors feared that excessive regulation would stifle progress and profits. Even within the scientific community, there were divisions, as some researchers prioritized the potential medical breakthroughs that implants promised, such as treating paralysis, Alzheimer's, and mental health disorders. The tension between hope and caution played out in editorial pages, panel discussions, and closed-door meetings. In the midst of this, Grace received an unexpected invitation, a private roundtable hosted by a coalition of tech CEOs who wanted to engage directly with critics like her and Lena. The meeting took place in a sleek Silicon Valley boardroom, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing a clear blue sky but offering no comfort to the gravity inside. The CEOs, some familiar, others shadowy figures, expressed genuine concern about the public backlash and the future of their companies. Yet beneath their polished words lurked skepticism about the pace of change they were being asked to accept. The discussion was tense but respectful, a rare moment where adversaries acknowledged shared stakes. Grace spoke not as a judge wielding a gavel but as a woman who had lost a brother to hubris and impatience. She urged them to embrace transparency, to invest in safety not just as compliance but as culture, to listen to the people their technologies affected. Lena presented scientific evidence of the brain's fragility and the unpredictable effects of neural interfaces, framing it as a call to humility rather than fear. Some CEOs nodded, some bristled, but the conversation planted seeds of possibility. Outside, protesters gathered quietly but firmly, their signs and chants a reminder that this was more than an industry debate, it was a societal reckoning. For Grace, the roundtable marked a turning point. She realized that the unseen battle wasn't just about laws or inventions, it was about trust. Trust between creators and users, between corporations and communities, between progress and principle. Building that trust required more than regulation, it demanded empathy, listening, and a willingness to admit when ambition had gone too far. As months passed, the manifesto's influence grew. Governments began to draft legislation reflecting its core tenets. The Monroe Initiative expanded its reach, collaborating with international bodies to create global standards. Neuralink Tech, under new leadership, pledged full cooperation and restructured its research with independent oversight. Elon Musk, though no longer in the public eye as much, quietly supported these efforts, contributing funds and expertise while maintaining his vow of accountability. Yet, Grace understood that battles like these never truly end. Technology would continue to evolve, bringing new challenges and questions. The lessons from Neuralink Tech's recklessness and the trial's outcome were only the beginning of a longer journey toward aligning innovation with humanity's deepest values. At night, she often thought of Tyler, his curiosity and idealism mingled with the tragedy that had shaped their lives. She found comfort in knowing that his story had sparked a movement bigger than any one person, one that might someday prevent others from suffering the same fate. In a world racing toward the future, the unseen battle for conscience and care was now front and center, and Grace Monroe was determined to keep fighting, not from a courtroom, but from the heart of that delicate, ongoing struggle. The journey from courtroom drama to quiet revolution was neither smooth nor simple, and for Grace Monroe, the fight to balance innovation with humanity revealed itself in unexpected shades of shadows and light. As the months wore on, she found herself grappling with contradictions that stretched her beliefs and challenged the clear-cut notions of right and wrong that had once guided her judicial decisions. The tech world was no longer a monolith of brilliance or villainy. It was a kaleidoscope of intentions, ambitions, mistakes, and hopes, each coloring the future in ways she hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, Grace received a letter from a former Neuralink tech engineer named Marcus, who had been part of the initial design team before leaving amid ethical concerns. He wrote of his own struggle with guilt and pride, confessing that while he had helped build devices that could change minds, he had also been naive about the human cost. Marcus had since founded a nonprofit focused on neurotech education in underserved communities, aiming to democratize knowledge that had too long been hoarded by elite circles. His letter was both a plea and an invitation, asking Grace to speak at his upcoming symposium. The invitation stirred something in her, a reminder that the story she lived was not just about loss but also about possibility, about the power of individuals to reclaim agency in a world speeding toward uncertainty. When Grace accepted, she entered a space filled with diverse voices, young students curious about brain science, activists wary of exploitation, scientists hopeful about medical breakthroughs, and entrepreneurs seeking ethical ways forward. The symposium became a microcosm of the larger debate, a place where tension and hope mingled palpably. During her speech, Grace shared not only the legal battles and ethical quandaries but also the deeply human stories behind the headlines, stories of families torn apart and communities awakened. She emphasized that the path forward required listening as much as leading, and that technology's greatest gift was not power but connection. Among the attendees was Camila, who had been documenting the event for their upcoming book. She captured moments of laughter and tears, fierce debates and tentative agreements, weaving them into a narrative that reflected the complexity of the moment. As Grace mingled with participants afterward, she noticed Marcus watching her with a mixture of admiration and sadness, a silent acknowledgement of shared history and newfound purpose. But shadows lingered. Not all voices welcomed this reckoning. In private online forums and encrypted chats, a faction of technologists and investors derided the growing calls for restraint as fearmongering and innovation killers. They argued that humanity had always adapted to change and that the future belonged to those bold enough to shape it without hesitation. Their rhetoric sometimes veered into conspiracies about regulatory capture and censorship, fueling distrust and division. Grace knew these divisions were not just ideological but deeply personal, born from fears of obsolescence, loss of control, and shattered dreams. She encountered them in emails, in public comments, even in hushed conversations among colleagues. The challenge was how to bridge this widening gap without alienating the very people whose cooperation was essential. One evening, as she reviewed notes for a panel discussion, Grace received an anonymous message, a video clip showing a prototype neural device malfunctioning during a clandestine trial, resulting in severe neurological damage to the test subject. The footage was raw, unfiltered, and devastating, a stark reminder that the dangers were real and ongoing. The sender urged her to use the evidence to demand immediate intervention. Torn between urgency and due process, Grace reached out to Lena Whitman and the Monroe Initiative. Together, they coordinated a discreet investigation that confirmed the device was part of an unregulated experimental program by a startup that had deliberately circumvented ethical oversight. The revelation ignited a new wave of concern and reinforced the necessity of vigilance. Grace testified before Congress, pleading for stronger protections and international cooperation, her voice steady but impassioned. Her efforts contributed to the passage of landmark legislation that mandated independent ethical review boards, data transparency, and user consent standards for neurotechnology. Yet, even as laws changed, Grace understood that legislation was only part of the solution. Culture and consciousness had to shift as well. She devoted time to mentoring young leaders in tech ethics, nurturing a generation that would hopefully navigate these waters with greater wisdom and compassion. On a personal level, Grace continued her journey of healing. She reconnected with Evelyn, her mother, forging a fragile but growing bond grounded in shared grief and renewed hope. Together, they planted a memorial garden for Tyler in their hometown, a living tribute to a life interrupted but never forgotten. In quiet moments, Grace often revisited the brain implant prototype Elon Musk had sent her, now displayed alongside Tyler's journal in her apartment. It was a symbol of both human ambition and fallibility, a reminder that every leap forward carried shadows that needed light. Her relationship with Elon, though distant, had softened into a mutual respect forged through hardship. They communicated occasionally, exchanging ideas about the future of neurotechnology and its ethical boundaries. The man who had once been a courtroom adversary had become, in a complicated way, a partner in responsibility. The world beyond Grace's personal and professional life continued to evolve. New breakthroughs in brain-computer interfaces promised unprecedented possibilities, restoring mobility to the paralyzed, treating mental illness, enhancing learning. But these advancements came paired with new questions about privacy, identity, and freedom. The dialogue sparked by the trial and its aftermath had opened the door to deeper inquiry, and society was only beginning to understand the implications. In this complex tapestry of shadows and light, Grace Monroe found purpose, not as a judge enforcing rules but as a guide helping humanity navigate uncharted terrain. She knew the road ahead would be difficult and that progress would require humility as much as ingenuity. But she believed in the power of stories, of loss, love, and courage, to illuminate the path forward. And as she stood before a crowd of eager listeners at another symposium, she shared a simple but profound truth: technology is not destiny. It is a reflection of who we are and who we choose to become. As the movement for responsible neurotechnology gained momentum, Grace Monroe found herself standing at a crossroads where law, ethics, and innovation converged in increasingly complicated ways. The courtroom had taught her that justice was never black and white, and now, in this new era, she realized the same was true for the very technologies that promised to transform human experience. One morning, Grace received an urgent call from Lena Whitman, who had uncovered a troubling new development. A biotech company, Nova Neuro, had announced plans to launch a next-generation brain implant capable not only of interfacing with neurons but of influencing emotional states through targeted neurostimulation. The technology was touted as a breakthrough in treating depression and anxiety, but the potential for misuse was staggering: emotional manipulation, loss of free will, or unauthorized behavioral control. The company's CEO dismissed ethical concerns as obstacles to progress, emphasizing the benefits for millions suffering from mental illness. This announcement ignited fierce debate across scientific, legal, and public spheres. Grace was invited to serve on a special ethics committee convened by the federal government to assess the implications of Nova Neuro's technology and to recommend safeguards. The committee included a diverse group of experts: neuroscientists, ethicists, lawyers, patient advocates, and technologists. The meetings were intense and often fractious, exposing fault lines between optimism for healing and fear of control. Grace's role was to navigate these tensions with clarity and compassion, ensuring that the voices of those who would be most affected, patients and their families, were heard amid the technical jargon and corporate interests. She drew on lessons from the Neuralink tech trial, reminding colleagues that technological innovation could never be divorced from human consequences. Outside the committee, public opinion was divided. Media outlets ran stories oscillating between hopeful testimonials of patients eager for relief and dystopian warnings of mind hacking and emotion algorithms. Online forums buzzed with speculation and anxiety. Grace spoke frequently in interviews and public forums, emphasizing the need for transparency, informed consent, and rigorous testing before any deployment. The emotional stakes were palpable. For many, the promise of relief from crippling mental illness was a beacon of hope; for others, the prospect of external influence over feelings was a violation of the self's most sacred territory. As discussions deepened, Grace was invited to visit Nova Neuro's flagship lab in Boston, where the technology was being developed. Walking through sterile hallways lined with cutting-edge equipment, she met with scientists who passionately believed they were on the verge of revolutionizing mental health care. They demonstrated early prototypes, explaining the sophisticated algorithms designed to target neural circuits associated with mood regulation. Despite their enthusiasm, Grace could not ignore the shadows beneath the gleaming surface: unanswered questions about long-term effects, the potential for coercion, and the societal impact of commodifying emotions. During a private conversation with Dr. Aaron Kim, Nova Neuro's chief neuroscientist, Grace probed the company's commitment to ethics. Aaron acknowledged the risks but argued that delay meant suffering for countless patients, that perfection was the enemy of progress. Grace respected his urgency but warned that haste without safeguards could lead to irreversible harm. Back in Washington, the Ethics Committee wrestled with drafting recommendations. Grace advocated for strict protocols, including mandatory psychological evaluations, clear consent processes, and independent monitoring. She also pushed for legislation requiring companies to disclose all data and to establish recourse mechanisms for individuals harmed by implants. Her proposals met resistance from industry representatives and some legal experts who feared stifling innovation and infringing on personal freedoms. Negotiations stretched for weeks, fraught with passionate appeals and pragmatic compromises. Throughout this period, Grace drew strength from the families she had met, people whose lives had been transformed or shattered by brain-computer interfaces. Their stories grounded her in the human reality behind abstract policy debates. She also maintained a fragile but steady dialogue with Elon Musk, whose experience with Neuralink tech provided invaluable insights, both cautionary and visionary. Elon's recent focus on developing non-invasive neurotechnologies aligned with the growing consensus that minimizing risk was paramount. Together, they discussed pathways toward safer innovation, recognizing that collaboration rather than confrontation would yield the best outcomes. Meanwhile, Grace's own life was marked by quiet evolution. Her relationship with Camila deepened as they finalized their book, weaving narratives that blended legal drama, scientific discovery, and personal resilience. The book was set to be published amid the ongoing debates, a testament to the complexity and urgency of their shared mission. One evening, after a long day at the committee, Grace received a message from Marcus, the former engineer-turned-educator. He invited her to speak at a conference in Chicago focusing on neuroethics education and community engagement. Accepting the invitation, Grace traveled to the Windy City and encountered a vibrant gathering of voices, students, educators, activists, and technologists united by a common goal: to democratize knowledge and empower individuals to navigate the ethical dilemmas of emerging brain technologies. During her keynote address, Grace spoke candidly about the crossroads humanity faced. She urged the audience to embrace both caution and courage, to demand accountability from innovators, and to cherish the core human values that technology must never override. The response was overwhelming. Standing ovations, heartfelt conversations, and renewed commitments to ethical vigilance. Yet, even as the movement gained traction, shadows loomed. Hackers and rogue operators saw opportunities in the unregulated frontier of neurotechnology, exploiting vulnerabilities to manipulate devices remotely or steal sensitive neural data. Reports emerged of individuals experiencing unexpected mood shifts, memory lapses, or identity confusion after unapproved device modifications. Law enforcement and cybersecurity agencies struggled to keep pace with these new threats, revealing glaring gaps in protection and regulation. Grace convened emergency meetings with cybersecurity experts, legal authorities, and patient advocates to address this emerging crisis. The discussions highlighted the interconnectedness of technology's promise and peril, the urgent need for cross-disciplinary solutions, and the fragile nature of trust in a world where minds could be digitally accessed. As these challenges unfolded, Grace found herself reflecting deeply on the meaning of autonomy and consent. She realized that the battle for ethical neurotechnology was inseparable from the broader fight to preserve human dignity in an era of unprecedented technological power. The choices made now would ripple through generations, shaping the very fabric of society. One quiet morning, Grace received a letter from a young woman named Sophie, a patient who had undergone early experimental neurostimulation for treatment-resistant depression. Sophie's letter was raw and moving, describing both relief from despair and the eerie sensation of sometimes feeling disconnected from her own emotions, as if her feelings were being edited by an unseen hand. Sophie's story underscored the nuanced realities faced by those living at the intersection of hope and risk. Grace reached out to offer support and vowed to advocate for safeguards that honored the complexity of human experience. The committee's final report, released after months of deliberation, called for a cautious but hopeful path forward. It recommended phased clinical trials, robust ethical oversight, enforceable transparency requirements, and ongoing monitoring of long-term effects. It emphasized the primacy of informed consent and the protection of cognitive liberty, the right to control one's own mental processes free from external manipulation. The report was hailed as a landmark achievement, setting standards that would influence policy worldwide. Yet Grace knew the work was far from over. Technology's rapid advance meant that new challenges would continually arise, demanding vigilance, empathy, and adaptability. In a private moment, she confided to Camila that this crossroads was not a destination but a perpetual journey, a dance between shadows and light that defined what it meant to be human in a digital age. As she looked out over the city skyline from her apartment, Grace felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was one she was determined to walk with courage and conviction, carrying the lessons of loss and love, justice and mercy, into an unfolding future where the mind itself was the final frontier. The momentum Grace Monroe and her allies had built was undeniable, yet the price of progress in the realm of neurotechnology was becoming painfully clear as unexpected consequences rippled through society, revealing fault lines that no legislation or ethics committee had fully anticipated. One particularly stormy evening, Grace received a call from her longtime confidant, Dr. Lena Whitman, who was visibly shaken. A patient who had participated in one of the new generation neural implant trials had suffered a catastrophic neurological event, a sudden seizure followed by severe cognitive impairment. The patient, a young man named David, had been an advocate for the technology, eager to escape the grip of his treatment-resistant epilepsy, but the hope that had fueled his participation now clashed with the devastating aftermath. Lena's research team had uncovered troubling anomalies in the implant's interaction with the brain's electrical signals, an instability that risked triggering such seizures unpredictably. The incident quickly captured headlines, reigniting fears about the safety of brain-computer interfaces and fueling the arguments of opponents who believed that humanity was tampering with forces beyond understanding. Grace, feeling the weight of responsibility more acutely than ever, visited David and his family. Sitting beside his hospital bed in a dimly lit room, she listened as his mother described the vibrant, curious son she once knew now trapped behind foggy eyes and broken memories. The encounter was a searing reminder that progress could exact a deeply human toll, measured not in data points but in lost lives and shattered dreams. Amid the crisis, public trust wavered, and regulatory bodies faced intense pressure to halt all ongoing trials. Grace and the Ethics Committee convened emergency sessions to reassess protocols, balancing the urgent need to protect patients with the recognition that halting innovation entirely could deny others life-changing treatments. The debate became polarized, patient advocacy groups split between those demanding immediate suspension and those urging cautious continuation with enhanced safeguards. The tension spilled over into political arenas, where lawmakers scrambled to respond to the public outcry. Corporations behind the technology found themselves under scrutiny as well. Nova Neuro, facing lawsuits and reputational damage, announced it would voluntarily pause its trials and initiate a comprehensive review. Their CEO issued a public apology, acknowledging that the quest for breakthroughs had outpaced their ability to ensure absolute safety. Elon Musk, while not directly involved with Nova Neuro, expressed solidarity with the victims and reinforced his commitment to responsible innovation through his foundation, which increased funding for neurotech safety research. For Grace, the crisis was both a personal and professional crucible. She grappled with feelings of doubt and grief, questioning whether the push for rapid advancement had blinded her and others to the full spectrum of risk. She found solace in conversations with Camila, whose journalistic work illuminated the human stories behind the headlines and reminded her of the resilience that still flickered in the darkest moments. As the months passed, David's condition stabilized, though his recovery was slow and uncertain. Grace helped organize support networks for patients and families navigating the aftermath of adverse neurotech experiences, emphasizing the importance of community and shared understanding. In parallel, the Ethics Committee expanded its focus beyond clinical safety to include psychological well-being, social impacts, and long-term consequences of neural interventions. The conversations deepened, acknowledging that brain implants were not merely medical devices but agents of profound change in identity and agency. A pivotal moment came when Grace was invited to testify before an international summit on emerging technologies. Addressing a packed auditorium of policymakers, scientists, and activists, she spoke candidly about the price of progress, the triumphs and tragedies, the hopes and hazards. Her words resonated globally, sparking commitments to unified standards, cross-border cooperation, and investments in neuroethics education. Yet, the path forward remained fraught. Underground markets for neural enhancements flourished, exploiting regulatory gaps and vulnerable populations. Cybersecurity breaches targeted brain-computer interfaces, raising fears of mental intrusion and manipulation on a scale previously unimagined. Grace collaborated with cybersecurity experts and human rights organizations to develop frameworks protecting cognitive liberty and digital brain integrity, recognizing that the struggle for control over the mind extended beyond physical implants to the virtual realm. Amid these battles, Grace's personal journey continued to evolve. Her relationship with Evelyn, her mother, deepened into mutual understanding and forgiveness, offering a balm for old wounds. She also nurtured a growing bond with Camila, whose empathy and insight enriched both their work and their lives. Together, they prepared to launch a documentary series chronicling the complex saga of neurotechnology, its pioneers, its victims, and the society grappling with the consequences. The series aimed to foster public dialogue and empower individuals to make informed choices in an increasingly interconnected world. Reflecting on the tumultuous landscape, Grace realized that the price of progress was not a simple ledger of losses and gains but a living story of human courage, fallibility, and hope. It demanded humility from innovators, vigilance from regulators, compassion from communities, and above all, a recognition that technology must serve humanity, not dominate it. In quiet moments, she would return to Tyler's journal and the brain implant prototype that had once symbolized both ambition and tragedy. They reminded her that every advance carried a story and that behind every breakthrough was a human heart, vulnerable and vital. The future was uncertain, but Grace held fast to the belief that through empathy, ethics, and endurance, the delicate balance between shadows and light could be maintained. And as she stood before a new generation of leaders and thinkers, she shared a final truth: progress is not measured solely by how far we can reach, but by how wisely we choose to use what we've gained. The fallout from the neurological incident with David rippled far beyond the immediate circle of patients and researchers, catalyzing a reckoning that challenged not only the future of neurotechnology but the very nature of accountability and redemption in an age where human minds and machines intertwined. Grace Monroe found herself at the center of this storm, navigating a landscape where legal battles, public opinion, and ethical dilemmas collided in unpredictable ways. In the months following the crisis, Grace received an unexpected summons to a high-profile court case involving Novaneuro and several families of patients harmed by their experimental implants. The lawsuit was poised to become one of the most significant legal challenges in the history of neurotechnology, potentially setting precedent for how companies would be held responsible for both direct and indirect consequences of brain-computer interfaces. As Grace prepared to take on the role of a legal advisor to the plaintiffs' coalition, she confronted the harsh realities of corporate power and the complexities of proving causality when the human brain, fluid, mysterious, and deeply personal, was involved. The courtroom became a battleground of narratives, where expert testimonies clashed, data was dissected, and emotions ran high. Families told heart-wrenching stories of loved ones whose personalities had shifted, whose memories had fragmented, whose autonomy had been compromised. Scientists argued over the limits of current understanding, sometimes contradicting one another on the very nature of the implant's effects. Amid the tension, Grace's legal acumen and empathetic presence helped the plaintiffs find their voice, framing their pain not just as individual tragedy but as a call for systemic change. Outside the courtroom, public demonstrations erupted, with activists demanding stricter regulations and transparency. The media spotlight intensified, amplifying every revelation and raising awareness about the urgent need for ethical standards in neurotechnology. Grace leveraged this attention to advocate for comprehensive reforms, testifying before congressional committees and participating in international forums. Meanwhile, Novaneuro's leadership faced its own reckoning. The company's CEO resigned amid mounting criticism, replaced by a new executive committed to rebuilding trust through openness and collaboration. Novaneuro launched initiatives to compensate affected patients and invested heavily in safety research and community engagement. This shift signaled a broader transformation within the industry, a movement from secrecy and rapid commercialization toward accountability and public partnership. Grace also witnessed moments of redemption on a more personal level. She reconnected with Marcus, the former Neuralink tech engineer, whose nonprofit had expanded its reach to provide education and support for neurotech users and their families. Together, they organized workshops and support groups that helped individuals navigate the emotional and practical challenges of living with brain implants. These gatherings became spaces of healing and empowerment, reminding Grace that beyond the headlines and lawsuits were real people seeking connection and understanding. Camila's documentary series progressed alongside these developments, capturing not only the legal drama and scientific breakthroughs but also the quiet stories of resilience and hope. Their work emphasized that redemption was possible, not through denial or blame, but through recognition, responsibility, and repair. As the case moved toward settlement talks, Grace felt the weight of the moment. The outcomes would influence public trust, corporate behavior, and future innovation trajectories. She encouraged the plaintiffs to seek solutions that prioritized healing and prevention, balancing justice with forward-looking compassion. One pivotal breakthrough came when an independent review panel discovered that certain software algorithms in the implants had unintended feedback loops, exacerbating neurological instability. This technical insight allowed for targeted fixes and new safety protocols, offering hope for safer devices. It also underscored the necessity of ongoing monitoring and adaptability in a rapidly evolving field. In the midst of these professional challenges, Grace's personal life flourished in unexpected ways. Her relationship with Evelyn matured into a partnership rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. Together, they established a foundation in Tyler's name to support ethical neurotechnology research and patient advocacy. This legacy became a source of strength and motivation for Grace, intertwining her grief with action. Camila's presence remained a constant source of inspiration and companionship. Their collaboration and friendship deepened into love, creating a sanctuary amid the chaos of their public lives. Their shared commitment to storytelling and justice bonded them in ways that transcended circumstance. As the courtroom saga concluded with a historic settlement that included compensation, stricter regulatory oversight, and commitments to transparency, Grace reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the shock of Tyler's tragedy through battles in the courtroom, to the broader societal awakening to neurotechnology's promises and perils. She understood that reckoning was not a moment but a process, a continuous striving toward accountability, healing, and growth. Redemption, she realized, required courage not only to confront past mistakes but to envision and build a better future. The challenges ahead remained daunting, new technologies emerging, new ethical questions arising, but Grace embraced them with renewed resolve. She knew that the story of human progress was one of both light and shadow, and that only by facing both honestly could society navigate the complexities of an increasingly interconnected and technologically enhanced existence. Standing before a crowd at a global conference on responsible innovation, Grace spoke with conviction. We must remember that behind every algorithm, every device, every advance, there are human lives, complex, fragile, and infinitely valuable. Our responsibility is to honor that humanity with integrity, empathy, and unwavering vigilance. Only then can progress truly be meaningful. As applause filled the room, Grace felt a quiet but powerful hope, a belief that through reckoning and redemption, the human spirit could guide technology toward a future where innovation served not just power or profit, but the shared dignity and flourishing of all. With the landmark settlement behind her and the neurotechnology industry beginning to rebuild with stronger ethical foundations, Grace Monroe found herself confronting the new frontier that was rapidly unfolding, an era where the boundaries between mind, machine, and society blurred in ways previously relegated to science fiction. The lessons from past trials and tribulations served as a compass, yet the horizon stretched wide and uncertain, dotted with uncharted challenges and possibilities. One of the most significant developments was the emergence of non-invasive brain-computer interfaces that promised to open channels of communication and control without the risks of surgical implants. Companies led by visionaries including Elon Musk poured resources into perfecting wearable devices capable of decoding neural signals with unprecedented precision, allowing users to control computers, prosthetics, and even other machines with mere thoughts. Grace was both excited and cautious. She recognized the transformative potential for people with disabilities, for education, and for creative expression, but she also knew that each breakthrough carried new questions about privacy, consent, and the definition of self. In this evolving landscape, Grace was invited to join an international coalition of experts, policymakers, and civil society leaders charged with shaping the governance frameworks for these emerging technologies. The coalition's mandate was ambitious: to balance innovation with rights, to protect individuals from exploitation while fostering scientific progress, and to anticipate challenges before they spiraled out of control. The coalition's work unfolded amid a backdrop of rapid technological advances, public fascination, and growing skepticism. News cycles were dominated by stories of mind-controlled devices aiding people in extraordinary ways, but also reports of data breaches, unauthorized neural recordings, and fears of thought surveillance. Grace advocated for robust safeguards, including encryption standards for neural data, transparent user agreements, and the creation of a new legal category recognizing cognitive privacy as a fundamental human right. Simultaneously, Grace maintained close ties with grassroots organizations representing neurotech users, patients, and marginalized communities. She emphasized the importance of inclusive dialogue to ensure that policies reflected diverse experiences and did not deepen existing inequalities. The coalition's meetings often reflected this tension, with tech industry representatives pushing for lighter regulations to encourage innovation, while advocates demanded stronger protections to prevent abuse. Grace's diplomatic skill was crucial in navigating these complex dynamics, helping build consensus around principles such as transparency, autonomy, and equity. In parallel with her policy work, Grace continued her own research and writing, documenting the unfolding story of neurotechnology's new frontier. Collaborating with Camila, who had become a leading voice in science journalism, they produced articles, podcasts, and a new documentary series that explored how these technologies were reshaping identity, communication, and society. Their work humanized the technical debates by spotlighting individual stories. From a young artist creating immersive experiences through brainwave art, to a veteran using non-invasive devices to regain mobility and independence, to activists fighting against neural data exploitation. One pivotal moment came when Elon Musk invited Grace to Tesla's Palo Alto Innovation Hub to witness firsthand the latest prototype of a wearable brain interface integrated with augmented reality glasses. The demonstration was breathtaking. Elon effortlessly manipulated holograms and controlled smart home devices through subtle neural commands. But beneath the spectacle, Grace asked probing questions about data security, informed consent, and the psychological effects of constant neural monitoring. Elon acknowledged the risks but argued that transparency and user empowerment were the best defenses against misuse. Their candid exchange highlighted the tension between visionary ambition and ethical responsibility, a balance Grace understood well. As the coalition's recommendations gained traction, some governments began enacting legislation recognizing neural rights, including protections against unauthorized neural surveillance, cognitive hacking, and involuntary neurodata collection. These legal advances marked a historic step in adapting human rights frameworks to emerging technologies, but enforcement remained a challenge in an increasingly interconnected and sometimes opaque global digital ecosystem. Meanwhile, new ethical dilemmas emerged. The commercialization of neural enhancement sparked debates about fairness, access, and the potential for new forms of social stratification. Could enhancements create cognitive elites, exacerbating inequality? How would society regulate enhancements that blurred the line between therapy and enhancement? Grace engaged with philosophers, economists, and social scientists to explore these questions, promoting policies that encouraged equitable access and discouraged coercive or exploitative practices. Throughout this time, Grace's personal life remained a source of grounding and inspiration. Her relationship with Camila blossomed amid shared passion for justice and storytelling. They traveled together to conferences and community events, weaving their experiences into a tapestry of activism and art. Grace also deepened her bond with Evelyn, whose health challenges reminded her of the preciousness of family and the need to balance work and personal well-being. In quieter moments, Grace reflected on her journey, from the early days of courtroom battles to standing on the precipice of this new frontier. She was acutely aware that the future was shaped not only by technological possibility but by the values and choices society embraced. The stakes were profound. These technologies touched the essence of human experience, thought, emotion, memory, identity, and thus demanded the highest levels of care and respect. One evening, as she walked through a bustling city park illuminated by the glow of digital displays and augmented reality installations, Grace felt a mixture of awe and responsibility. The world was changing faster than ever, yet the core human quest remained: connection, understanding, and the pursuit of a life well lived. The new frontier was not just about neural circuits and algorithms but about the delicate interplay between technology and humanity's enduring spirit. Grace's voice echoed in her mind: progress must be guided by empathy and ethics, by a commitment to justice and inclusion. She resolved to carry that mission forward, knowing that the journey was far from over and that the challenges ahead would test the very limits of courage and wisdom. As the city's lights shimmered against the night sky, Grace felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face whatever lay beyond the horizon with heart, mind, and unwavering hope. As the promise of neurotechnology's new frontier illuminated the path forward, shadows of doubt began to creep into the landscape, casting a pall over the optimism that had fueled innovation and reform. Grace Monroe sensed the growing unease beneath the surface, a tension between enthusiasm and apprehension that threatened to unravel the fragile consensus the coalition had built. The first signs appeared subtly, in whispered conversations among experts and in the cautious questions raised during public forums. Stories emerged of users experiencing unexpected psychological effects, anxiety, depersonalization, and intrusive memories triggered by neural interfaces that probed deeper than anyone had fully anticipated. Mental health professionals warned that continuous neural monitoring and interaction might blur boundaries between self and machine, creating new vulnerabilities. Grace recognized the urgency of these concerns. She convened a task force of neuroscientists, psychologists, ethicists, and patient advocates to study the long-term cognitive and emotional impacts of brain-computer interfaces. Their research revealed a complex picture: while many users benefited enormously, a significant minority experienced side effects that challenged their sense of identity and autonomy. These findings unsettled the neurotechnology community and sparked heated debates about the ethics of widespread deployment. At the same time, geopolitical tensions added another layer of complexity. Rival nations accelerated investments in neural technologies for military and intelligence applications, seeking strategic advantages through cognitive enhancement, mind-controlled weaponry, and neural espionage. Grace and her coalition struggled to establish international norms and treaties in a climate of suspicion and secrecy. Diplomatic efforts faltered as governments prioritized national security over transparency, and fears of neural warfare seeped into public consciousness. Privacy advocates warned of neurosurveillance states, where thoughts could be monitored or manipulated by authoritarian regimes. Meanwhile, commercial interests continued to push boundaries. Some companies, driven by competition and profit, raced to market unproven neural enhancements and data services with minimal oversight. Cases of data breaches involving sensitive neural information shocked the world. Imagine a hacker accessing not just personal emails but memories, emotions, or decision-making processes. Grace became a vocal critic of lax regulations and corporate overreach, calling for stringent protections and public accountability. She also worked to empower individuals, advocating for neural literacy programs to help people understand the risks and rights related to their brain data. In the midst of these challenges, Grace faced personal trials. Evelyn's health declined, reminding her of life's fragility and the preciousness of human connection beyond technology. Camila supported her through the difficult times, their partnership deepening through shared vulnerability. Grace found solace in writing and quiet reflection, seeking balance between activism and self-care. A particularly jarring moment came when a former colleague and prominent neuroscientist publicly challenged Grace's coalition, accusing them of stifling innovation and succumbing to fear-driven regulation. The scientist argued that humanity's destiny lay in transcending biological limits and that caution only delayed progress. This confrontation highlighted the ongoing philosophical divide within the community. How to reconcile ambition with responsibility, hope with humility. Grace responded by emphasizing that true progress was not just about reaching new heights but about ensuring that no one was left behind or harmed along the way. As the public discourse grew more polarized, Grace worked tirelessly to foster dialogue and understanding, organizing forums that brought together diverse voices, scientists, ethicists, policymakers, patients, activists, to build bridges rather than walls. She believed that only through inclusive conversation could the society navigate the shadows of doubt. One breakthrough in this effort came when the task force's research led to the development of new neural interface protocols that minimized psychological risks while preserving functionality. These innovations offered hope for safer, more humane technologies and renewed trust among users and regulators. Yet, Grace knew the shadows would never fully disappear. They were part of the human condition, reminders that every advance carried risk and that vigilance was a perpetual necessity. Reflecting on these complexities, Grace accepted that the journey of neurotechnology was not a linear path of progress but a dynamic dance of light and shadow, courage and caution. The future remained uncertain, but she remained steadfast in her mission to guide it with wisdom and compassion. As she prepared to speak at a global summit addressing the ethical challenges of neural technologies, Grace's thoughts returned to the core truth that had sustained her throughout: technology must serve humanity's highest values, protecting dignity, freedom, and the sanctity of the mind. With that conviction, she stepped onto the stage, ready to confront the shadows and illuminate the way forward. The mounting pressures from technological advances, ethical controversies, and geopolitical rivalries converged to create a breaking point that challenged Grace Monroe and everyone invested in the future of neurotechnology. As debates raged and regulations tightened, an unexpected crisis erupted that thrust the industry, and Grace's leadership, into a new level of urgency and uncertainty. It began with a whistleblower leak from within a leading neurotech corporation, revealing that certain brain-computer interfaces had been deployed with experimental features that bypassed safety protocols and exploited neural vulnerabilities for commercial gain. The leak sent shockwaves through the public and regulatory bodies, sparking outrage and widespread demands for accountability. Grace, caught between her roles as advocate, advisor, and ethical guardian, immediately mobilized her network to investigate and respond. The revelations exposed how competitive pressures and lack of oversight had allowed corners to be cut, risking users' mental health and privacy. Families came forward describing experiences of involuntary mood alterations, memory disruptions, and in extreme cases, loss of control over their own thoughts. The scandal reignited fears about the potential for neural manipulation and mind hacking, with implications far beyond anything previously imagined. Grace's coalition worked tirelessly to support affected users, coordinate with regulators, and push for immediate recalls and stricter enforcement. The media spotlight intensified, with Grace emerging as a prominent spokesperson urging transparency and systemic reform. Yet the crisis also deepened divisions within the neurotech community. Some industry leaders resisted what they called overregulation, warning that excessive restrictions would stifle innovation and competitiveness on the global stage. Others argued that the crisis underscored the need for a fundamental re-evaluation of the ethical frameworks guiding neural technologies. Amid this turmoil, Grace grappled with the personal toll. The relentless demands of public advocacy, coupled with the emotional weight of witnessing human suffering, tested her resilience. Her relationship with Camila grew more precious, a sanctuary of support and understanding amid the storm. Together, they documented the crisis's human stories, amplifying voices too often ignored. As investigations unfolded, it became clear that the crisis was not isolated but symptomatic of broader systemic failures: weak enforcement, insufficient transparency, and corporate cultures prioritizing profit over people. Grace called for a paradigm shift, advocating for a model of neurotechnology development grounded in ethics, inclusivity, and accountability. One of the most contentious battles centered on the role of artificial intelligence embedded within neural devices. Critics argued that AI decision-making could override user autonomy, while proponents emphasized AI's potential to enhance safety and personalize therapy. Grace encouraged nuanced dialogue, emphasizing the necessity of safeguards that preserved human agency. The crisis also prompted a wave of grassroots activism, with neurotech users organizing for rights and protections. Grace partnered with these movements, recognizing their critical role in shaping policy and culture. Their demands for transparency, informed consent, and equitable access resonated across sectors. In the midst of these upheavals, Grace's coalition worked on a landmark proposal for an international neurotechnology ethics accord, a treaty designed to set binding standards for safety, privacy, and human rights protections globally. Negotiations were arduous, but Grace's leadership and ability to bridge divergent perspectives proved vital. The accord aimed to create a new governance model suited to the complex, transnational nature of neural technologies. As the accord gained momentum, it symbolized a collective commitment to reclaim the narrative of neurotechnology, not as a tool of control or exploitation, but as a catalyst for human empowerment and flourishing. Throughout the breaking point, Grace remained anchored by her core belief that technology must be a servant to humanity's deepest values, not a master. Her speeches echoed a call for vigilance, empathy, and courage in the face of unprecedented challenges. "We stand at a crossroads," she declared at a major conference, "where the choices we make will shape the essence of our humanity. Let us choose wisely." The breaking point revealed both the fragility and the resilience of the neurotechnology movement. It exposed flaws and risks but also galvanized reform and solidarity. For Grace, it was a crucible of growth, testing her convictions, deepening her empathy, and sharpening her resolve. As the crisis began to wane, the path forward remained complex and uncertain, but one thing was clear: the journey of neurotechnology would demand relentless care, ethical vigilance, and a steadfast commitment to the dignity of every human mind it touched. After the tumultuous breaking point that shook the neurotechnology world to its core, a subtle but powerful shift began to take hold, a turning tide that signaled renewed hope and progress forged from the lessons of crisis. Grace Monroe, having weathered the storm of scandal and skepticism, found herself at the forefront of this transformative wave, guiding efforts to rebuild trust, strengthen safeguards, and inspire innovation grounded in ethical integrity. The aftermath of the whistleblower revelations and ensuing regulatory clampdowns had initially cast a shadow over the industry, but out of the darkness emerged a collective resolve to do better. Companies committed to transparency and accountability, working openly with regulators, researchers, and patient communities to establish rigorous standards and best practices. Grace played a pivotal role in facilitating these collaborations, leveraging her credibility and diplomatic skill to bridge gaps between often competing interests. One of the most significant achievements during this period was the establishment of a global neurotechnology oversight body, an independent organization tasked with monitoring developments, auditing compliance, and advising governments and corporations on ethical implementation. This body incorporated diverse perspectives, including neuroscientists, ethicists, user advocates, and legal experts, embodying the coalition's long-held vision of inclusive governance. Grace was appointed to its advisory council, a role she embraced with humility and determination. The oversight body's work included developing clear guidelines for informed consent, data privacy, and mental health monitoring, as well as mechanisms for rapid response to adverse events. These frameworks were designed to be adaptable, recognizing the fast pace of technological change and the need for ongoing vigilance. Public engagement also became a central pillar of the turning tides. Grace and her partners launched widespread education campaigns aimed at enhancing neural literacy among diverse populations. Workshops, online platforms, and community forums helped people understand the benefits and risks of neurotechnology, empowering them to make informed choices. This grassroots approach fostered a sense of shared responsibility and trust, countering misinformation and fear. Technological innovation flourished under these new conditions. Researchers developed neural interfaces with enhanced safety features, improved customization, and reduced invasiveness. Advances in AI-assisted diagnostics and therapies brought relief to patients suffering from neurological disorders and mental health conditions. Grace witnessed first-hand stories of transformation, people regaining mobility, overcoming depression, and expressing creativity in ways previously unimaginable. One particularly inspiring example was a project that integrated neural prosthetics with artistic expression, enabling users to create music, paintings, and immersive experiences through thought alone. Grace supported such initiatives, seeing them as a testament to technology's potential to enhance human dignity and joy. At the same time, the geopolitical landscape evolved. The International Neurotechnology Ethics Accord, which Grace had helped to negotiate during the crisis, gained ratification by an increasing number of countries. While challenges remained, the accord fostered unprecedented cooperation and transparency in research and development, curbing the worst excesses of competitive secrecy and weaponization fears. This cooperative spirit opened new avenues for cross-border collaboration on neurological health, rehabilitation, and education. On a personal level, Grace's relationships deepened and flourished amid this period of renewal. Her partnership with Camila grew stronger, their shared mission and love intertwining in a powerful bond of support and inspiration. Evelyn's health stabilized, allowing Grace moments of peace and joy that replenished her spirit. Together, they celebrated small victories and found solace in each other's presence. Grace also mentored a new generation of leaders, young scientists, ethicists, and activists, passing on hard-earned wisdom and encouraging them to carry forward the mission with courage and compassion. Reflecting on the journey, Grace acknowledged the complexity of progress, a mosaic of breakthroughs and setbacks, hope and caution, innovation and introspection. She understood that the turning tides were not an endpoint but a dynamic state, requiring ongoing commitment and humility. As she prepared to deliver a keynote at an international neurotechnology summit, Grace's message was clear and resonant: our journey is a testament to resilience, the resilience of human values, communities, and the relentless pursuit of a future where technology uplifts rather than diminishes our shared humanity. We must continue to navigate this path with open eyes and open hearts. The summit itself was a vibrant celebration of the turning tides, a gathering of minds and voices united in purpose. Grace's speech inspired renewed enthusiasm and resolve, galvanizing collaborative projects and partnerships. The mood was one of cautious optimism balanced with a sober awareness of the work ahead. As the conference concluded, Grace walked among attendees, scientists, users, policymakers, feeling the palpable energy of a community recommitted to ethical innovation. The city skyline glowed in the evening light, a metaphor for the dawn of a new chapter in neurotechnology's story. Grace knew that challenges would persist, emerging technologies would continue to test ethical boundaries, unforeseen dilemmas would arise, and the human condition would always resist easy answers. But she also believed that the turning tides had demonstrated the power of collective will and shared values to shape a future where technology honored the dignity and complexity of the mind. With a steady heart and clear vision, Grace embraced the turning tides, ready to navigate the uncharted waters ahead, guided by the lessons of the past and the hopes of tomorrow. As the turning tides gained momentum, Grace Monroe found herself standing at a crossroads of destiny, where decisions made would chart the future course of neurotechnology and its profound impact on humanity. The landscape was both exhilarating and daunting. Advances in neural interfaces promised to revolutionize medicine, communication, and even human experience, but the ethical and social implications grew increasingly complex. At the heart of the crossroads was a groundbreaking proposal from a coalition of scientists and engineers aiming to develop a fully integrated neural network that connected multiple users in real time, allowing shared thoughts, emotions, and experiences. This neural collective concept held extraordinary promise for empathy, collaboration, and healing, offering a new way for humans to connect beyond words and physical presence. Yet it also raised fundamental questions about individuality, privacy, and consent on an unprecedented scale. Grace's advisory council was tasked with evaluating the proposal's ethical framework, safety protocols, and societal implications. The deliberations were intense, reflecting the deep philosophical and practical dilemmas posed by such a radical leap. Some argued that the neural collective could usher in a new era of understanding and unity, breaking down barriers of isolation and misunderstanding that had long plagued human relations. Others warned of the risks of losing selfhood, of coercion, or exploitation within such an interconnected mental space. Grace approached the crossroads with her characteristic blend of empathy and rigor, advocating for a cautious but open-minded exploration. She emphasized the need for voluntary participation, robust safeguards, and ongoing oversight to ensure respect for autonomy and diversity. Simultaneously, Grace was aware of the broader societal context. Rising polarization, digital misinformation, and distrust of institutions challenged the prospects for such intimate technologies. Public forums and debates were fraught, with passionate voices on all sides reflecting hopes, fears, and skepticism. Grace worked tirelessly to foster dialogue, promote education, and listen deeply to community concerns. The Neural Collective proposal also brought Grace face-to-face with Elon Musk once more. Elon, now focusing his efforts on this new frontier, envisioned the Neural Collective as the next evolutionary step for humanity, a way to transcend the limitations of language and isolation. Their discussions were intense and thoughtful, a meeting of vision and caution. Elon acknowledged the ethical complexities and pledged transparency and collaboration. Grace appreciated his willingness to engage but reminded him that the stakes were not just technological but deeply human. As the advisory council moved toward a decision, Grace reflected on her own journey, how she had evolved from a fierce courtroom advocate into a global leader navigating the delicate balance between innovation and responsibility. She knew that whatever choice was made would set a precedent for future neurotechnological advancements and societal norms. In a landmark public address, Grace articulated the council's consensus: the Neural Collective would proceed, but only under stringent conditions ensuring informed consent, mental health safeguards, and continuous monitoring. Participation would be strictly voluntary, with clear protocols for withdrawal and data protection. The project would be transparent, inclusive, and subject to ongoing ethical review. The announcement sparked widespread discussion and mixed reactions. Enthusiasts hailed it as a bold step toward a more connected and compassionate world. Critics remained wary, concerned about potential abuses and unintended consequences. Grace welcomed the debate as a sign of a healthy, democratic process, underscoring that vigilance and adaptability must accompany progress. In the months that followed, pilot programs launched with small, carefully selected groups of volunteers. Early results were promising. Participants reported profound experiences of empathy, creativity, and shared problem-solving. Yet challenges emerged, including emotional overload, privacy breaches, and technical glitches that underscored the complexity of melding minds. Grace remained deeply involved, supporting research teams, engaging with users, and advocating for continuous improvement. On the personal front, Grace's partnership with Camila flourished as they navigated the emotional terrain of these developments together. Camila's storytelling brought the Neural Collective stories to a wider audience, humanizing the technology and fostering public understanding. Evelyn's presence remained a source of strength and grounding, reminding Grace of the enduring importance of family and individual dignity amidst sweeping change. As the Neural Collective evolved from concept to reality, Grace understood that humanity stood at a defining moment, a crossroads where technology offered new possibilities for connection and transformation, but also demanded unwavering commitment to ethical principles and human values. The choices made here would ripple across generations, shaping the essence of what it meant to be human in a world intertwined with machines and minds. With a heart full of hope and resolve, Grace embraced the challenge, ready to guide the journey through uncertainty toward a future where the promise of neurotechnology could be realized without sacrificing the precious sanctity of the individual self. The crossroads were daunting, but Grace believed in the resilience and wisdom of humanity to navigate them with courage, compassion, and care. As the Neurotechnology Ethics Accord matured and the Neural Collective pilot programs expanded, Grace Monroe found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey she had undertaken, from a courtroom battle challenging powerful interests to shaping a global movement that redefined the relationship between technology and humanity. The legacy she envisioned was not merely one of technological achievement but of wisdom, compassion, and respect for the fragile beauty of the human mind. In this concluding phase, Grace focused on embedding the lessons learned into institutions, culture, and public consciousness to ensure that future generations would inherit a world where neurotechnology served as a beacon of empowerment rather than a tool of domination. She launched a comprehensive initiative called Legacy of Light, dedicated to preserving ethical vigilance, promoting education, and fostering global collaboration. This initiative created scholarships for young neuroscientists and ethicists committed to responsible innovation, funded public awareness campaigns, and established interdisciplinary think tanks tasked with anticipating emerging challenges before they became crises. Grace knew that vigilance was a continuous responsibility. As neural technologies advanced toward more seamless integration with human cognition and emotion, the boundary between human and machine would blur in ways that required ongoing reflection and adaptation. The Legacy of Light aimed to build a culture that celebrated this complexity and upheld human dignity at every step. One of the most poignant moments in this final chapter came during a global symposium where Grace was invited to deliver a keynote address on the future of neurotechnology and humanity. She spoke not only as a leader but as a witness to the transformative power of empathy, courage, and collaboration. Our journey has taught us that technology alone cannot define our destiny, she said. It is our choices, grounded in compassion and respect, that will illuminate the path forward. Every mind is a universe, unique and sacred. As we connect these universes, let us do so with humility, love, and a steadfast commitment to protect the essence of what makes us human. The symposium was filled with diverse voices, from scientists and policymakers to neurotech users and activists, all united in the vision Grace articulated. The atmosphere was one of hope tempered with wisdom, a celebration of progress coupled with a reminder of the ongoing work required to steward these powerful tools responsibly. Outside the formal proceedings, Grace connected with many individuals whose lives had been touched by neurotechnology in profound ways. Stories poured in of people overcoming disability, reclaiming memories, healing trauma, and finding new forms of expression and connection. These stories reinforced Grace's conviction that at its best, neurotechnology could amplify the human spirit and bridge divides. Grace also maintained her close relationships with Camila and Evelyn, whose love and support remained the foundation of her strength. Camila's storytelling continued to inspire broader public understanding, weaving narratives that made complex science accessible and deeply human. Evelyn's resilience and wisdom were a constant reminder of the preciousness of life beyond technology. As the Legacy of Light initiative gained global recognition, Grace saw seeds planted for future generations, young minds inspired to pursue neurotechnology not as a race to conquer but as a shared endeavor to enrich human life with dignity and care. The ethical frameworks, educational programs, and international collaborations she helped build promise to guide them through challenges yet to come. Looking back, Grace felt a profound sense of gratitude and humility. The journey had been marked by conflict and hope, darkness and illumination, setbacks and breakthroughs. Through it all, the enduring truth was clear: love, empathy, and integrity were the true engines of progress. In the quiet moments of reflection, Grace often returned to a simple belief that had sustained her from the beginning, that life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. This belief had guided her through courtroom battles, scientific debates, personal trials, and global challenges. It was the legacy she hoped to leave, a legacy of light illuminating the path toward a future where technology and humanity coexisted in harmony, each enriching the other. As the sun set on this chapter of her life, Grace looked ahead with a steady heart and open mind, ready to face whatever new horizons awaited. The story was far from over, but the foundation was strong, built on the unshakable conviction that the human spirit could rise to meet the challenges of a brave new world. And in that conviction lay the promise of a better tomorrow. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?